Mona Island. Until the fall of 2019, I was completely unaware of its existence. I knew that mainland Puerto Rico had a rich, vibrant culture, beautiful beaches, and friendly people. But when I was asked to travel to San Juan in October of 2019 on a research trip, I had no idea that this opportunity would be one of the most transformative experiences of my life. After a short flight from San Juan to Mayagüez on the west coast, we drove south to meet the rest of the group that we would be working with for the next 2 weeks. We were a team of 8 that came together to conduct surveys to determine the population of the Mona Island ground iguana. Mona Island is a 13,590-acre limestone island that sits directly between the Dominican Republic and mainland Puerto Rico. Mona Island is a remote, uninhabited island that, due to tectonic uplift and sea level changes, sheer cliffs rise 90 meters above the water for most of the island. The geology is interesting in the fact that it has a dolomite core with a limestone cap. As the rainwater eroded away the limestone, it has created over 200 caves, which may have contributed to the eventual human occupation dating back to 2800 BC. Another pivotal time in Mona's history was during a 50-year period in the late 1800s and early 1900s, where guano produced by the island's resident bat populations was extracted from at least 15 caves. 100 metric tons per day of this nutrient-rich product were removed and eventually turned into fertilizer. Now the island serves as a protected space and it is managed by DENR, the Puerto Rico Department of Natural and Environmental Resources. A small number of rangers stay on the island, along with short-term research teams focusing on sea turtles and removal of invasive species. There are a number of species that have special designations under the Endangered Species Act. The Mona boa is listed as threatened due to invasive cats and rats. Sea turtles that are considered endangered nest on the beaches here, but invasive pigs eat the eggs and damage nesting sites. Non-native trees like the Australian pine encroach on their preferred beach locations. Our focus was a joint project between Island Conservation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and DENR. It is intended to be a multi-year data collection effort with recommendations for invasive removal to follow. Due to hurricanes and the COVID pandemic, access to the island was limited for long stretches of time. The island was divided into 4 zones, each with their own unique terrain and challenges. For our portion of the project, teams of 2 would spend 2 days laying the transects that the following teams would survey as they rotated through that zone. I started in Zone 4 on the eastern side of the island. My partner JP and I would set up camp at Faro, which is the decommissioned lighthouse that rises above the plateau. Work began on the lighthouse in the early 1890s, and a narrow gauge track was built to move supplies across the island. The lighthouse is 52 feet high and had a 12-sided lantern whose signal was visible for 20 nautical miles. In 1926, a hurricane destroyed portions of the island road and damaged the lighthouse. Finally, in 1973, the light was automated and the lighthouse was left to the elements. As we set out for our first day of laying the transects, a I quickly realized how challenging this was going to be. The area is covered in cactus and other plants that seemingly do their best to make even walking in a straight line nearly impossible. Each transect is 300 meters long, and at every 5 meters, you would tie pink flagging tape onto a tree or cactus or even a rock on the ground. The area was extremely exposed to the sun, and temperatures rose quickly in the arid environment. I remember being so grateful to find one tree that we could crawl under that provided even a small amount of shade. The next day, we continued laying more transects that would finish out Zone 4. We worked away from the coastline on a trail that runs east and west across the island. As we set our transects off this trail, it became apparent that you wouldn't have to get too far off the main trail in order to feel completely lost. We did carry a GPS and a satellite phone, but staying together and staying hydrated were my main focus points. I told JP at the end of our trip that I had spent every day just staring at the back of his boots as we forged through our hikes. He surprised me by giving his boots a little makeover on our last day. To finish our time at Faro, I spent a few minutes walking around the keeper's house and storage building. What was life like for the people that were stationed here? Keepers with families left their children on the mainland during the school year and then would join them on the island for breaks. It would be a very quiet and remote place to live. I enjoyed the silence and absence of all man-made sound, aside from the occasional Coast Guard helicopter on patrol. Due to the island's location, it is a favorite spot, along with nearby Monito to the northwest, for human smugglers to force migrants off their boats. They are typically fleeing from Haiti and the Dominican Republic across the Mona Passage to the west. The U.S. Coast Guard and Customs and Border Protection respond to these rescues on both islands and the surrounding waters. We returned to our home base at Sardinera in order to resupply our water, do laundry, and swim to rinse off 2 days of fieldwork filth. It also gave us the opportunity to talk to our other teams to get insight into our next zone. The next morning, we loaded up and headed down the access road to our new location in Zone 3. This area followed a north-south trail that would lead to one of the many depression forests. These areas are formed when erosion creates a depression in the limestone base where vegetation can decompose and collect to provide soil to other plants. As we would walk along the transect line, we would stop every 5 meters at the flag and look left and right 10 meters to determine if we saw any iguanas or signs of their presence. We also made note of any pigs or goats in those surveyed areas. Once we reached the depression forest, we were able to count our first iguana. There were also interesting land crabs that were hiding in the rocks. With our field work completed, we returned to home base to unpack, clean up, and catch up with our other teams. We enjoyed one last meal together before catching a glimpse of the Milky Way on a clear night over the island. As we departed the island for our crossing back to the mainland, I reflected on my time on Mona Island. What did I take away from the experience? The first thing that came to mind was that I will never take drinking water for granted. I relish the remoteness and solitude of our time in the field. And I also learned that hard things are more mental than physical. And finally, I recognized that I was privileged to join a team of people with varied backgrounds that all came together on that island for 10 days to lay the groundwork for future fieldwork to be conducted. I can't begin to say how thankful I am that I was able to be part of the experience.